The Rings of Power is finally here. Right now I'm focusing my channel on the Wheel of Time book series, but as a massive Tolkien fan, I couldn't resist but to review the series, so without much further ado, let's cut to the chase. The aesthetics in general were outstanding. The opening sequence looked amazing, with the visuals of Valinor and the two trees, Telperion and Laurelin. Although I must say that everything concerning Valinor, the First Age and the war against Morgoth might be confusing for people who didn't read the Silmarillion, which I think are mostly the targeted audience. It's not clearly explained what happened to Sauron after Morgoth was defeated, even giving the impression that he rallied the remaining orcs in a last stand, when actually he was not only defeated as Morgoth's lieutenant, he even repented, at least for a time. But yeah, the aesthetics were spot on, and it was a nice touch that they kept the same style of elven armor from the Lord of the Rings movies. The status of Galadriel as a commander is properly addressed, since she was one of Sauron's major detractors, leading her people, the Noldor, as much as he could against him. But I'm afraid to say that she did not participate in the physical fight. She was not that kind of general. That said, I think the show could benefit from a warrior Galadriel. It couldn't hurt to see her as such. What did hurt was that expedition into Forthwithe, the frozen northern lands, where the elves seemed to find Morgoth's base, which could only possibly be Angband or Utumno, the Dark Lord's main fortresses. But that goes against Tolkien's lore, since both were destroyed in the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. That snow troll, though, could easily fit into Middle-earth's lore, and it looked amazing, as well as the orcs that in my opinion were vastly superior to those in Peter Jackson's movies. But they kind of were bound to be, since Amazon unloaded huge amounts of money in the making of this series. So, moving on. What was poorly addressed was Galadriel's status within the Kingdom of Lindon. She's shown as a friend of Elrond and an equal, but by this time Elrond was little more than a youngling by Elven standards, and Galadriel was one of the eldest among the Eldar, one of the few to be born in the undying lands of Valinor. She's even shown repeatedly reminding Elrond what was it like to live in the lands across the sea, before the marring of Arda, the world, by Morgoth. This is at odds with how she fits in Elven society in the show. She is seen as a low-ranking officer when actually she was on par with High King Gil-galad, to whom she was his elder, since she was in fact his great-aunt, for Finrod and Galadriel had more brothers. One of them was Angrod, whose son, Orodreth, was Gil-galad's father. That's why it was instantly weird for me to see Galadriel as a close friend to Elrond, since, you see, she's his mother-in-law. Which brings Celeborn to the table. By Tolkien's chronology, by this time Galadriel was already married to him. But let's be patient, it would not hurt very much to have a plot in which they both meet. On the bright side, what was well portrayed about Galadriel's character is that she was one of the first to feel Sauron's shadow looming over Middle-earth again. But the caveat here is that Gil-galad, unlike the reluctant version of the show, fully supported the idea of staying vigilant, the High King of the Noldor being the main thorn in Sauron's side during the Second Age. Another thing that cannot go unsaid is that Galadriel didn't inherit her enmity against Sauron from his dead brother. Finrod himself didn't have a personal feud against him, at least not more so than any other elf. Finrod did die at the hands of the Dark Lord, but saving his friend Beron's life, to whom he did have a personal debt, as told in Tolkien's novel of Beren and Luthien. Instead, Galadriel, as a leader of the Noldor people, took upon herself the responsibility of defeating Sauron, along Gil-galad, and later Elrond and Elendil. But the biggest mistake in these first two episodes, in my humble opinion, is the whole subplot of Galadriel's voyage into Valinor. In the first place, it was not Gil-galad's right to appoint who gets to travel back to Valinor and who doesn't. After Morgoth's defeat, the Valar, the ruling powers of the world in Tolkien's works, allowed all of the elves to return to the Undying Lands, and was left up to them to decide when and if to return. Galadriel was not forced to obey Gil-galad's command to board the ship, and she remained on this side of the sea out of love for Middle-earth, thus rendering the whole plot of jumping off the boat pointless. And impossible besides, because you see, Aman, the western continent in which the land of Valinor sits, is located thousands of miles across the sea from Middle-earth. Jumping outboard within reach of Valinor would have meant death for Galadriel. Elven bodies are more resistant than humans, but they're not unbreakable. Plus, she wouldn't have found a ship crowded by men, since the waters surrounding Valinor were forbidden to them. But not everything is grim about the show. In my opinion, it was the right choice to show the ancestors of the Hobbits roaming through the lands of Ravanian, since Tolkien himself told us that they lived to the east of the Great River in ancient times, wandering about, ever migrating with their clans. The main Hobbit character's name, Elanor, is an ode to Sam Gamgee's daughter. I have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, it's a heartwarming reminder of Sam's little girl, but on the other, that particular name was a rare oddity in the Hobbit world, since it came from an Elven word, learned by Sam in Lothlorien. But since it was Galadriel herself who showed the Elanor flower to the gardener, and this is Galadriel's story, I'll let it pass. Another thing the show could benefit from is the subplot of Elrond and Durin forging an alliance of elves and dwarves. It's not exactly how it was described by Tolkien, since it was rather Celebrimbor who gives birth to the realm of Eregion along his dwarven friend Narvi, the same one who made the door into Moria. But what the heck, I'm all for it anyway. Especially since Khazad-dûm was all that I expected and more. It looks amazing, so kudos for that. I will leave Arondir's subplot as an open interrogation mark for now. I would like to see where this is going. The notion of a group of elves watching the Easterlings closely is entirely a product of the show, since Tolkien never stated such a thing, even if it is true that the Easterlings were descended from those men who sided with Morgoth during the First Age. Who knows, maybe we'll get a positive surprise out of all of this. Lastly, my most burning question is about the character that people over the internet have already baptized as Meteor Man. This figure that falls from the sky and, so far, is a complete mystery. I admit, I am not at all thrilled about it, since this is another of those things entirely created by Amazon. This is not a part of Tolkien's legendarium, so I will just have my fingers crossed and hope for the better. So, if you're interested in finding out, stay with me for next episode's review. If you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.